My cousin stole every business idea I ever had, so I invented one fake startup that bankrupted him in 6 months. My cousin Trevor has been a thief since we were kids, but he never steals anything you can touch. He steals ideas. If I told him about a side project on a Sunday, he'd be pitching it to his dad's investor friends by Wednesday. If I mentioned a niche I was researching, he'd suddenly be an expert on it the next month. It started in high school. I had a small lawn care business with 3 regular clients and a mower I'd saved up for. Trevor told the same neighbors he could do it cheaper and faster, undercut my prices, then quit 2 months later when he realized actual work was involved. The neighbors blamed me too because we shared a last name. In college, I started a tutoring service for kids preparing for the SAT. I built a real curriculum and had 10 students. Trevor heard about it at a family barbecue and launched his elite tutoring agency 3 weeks later. He hired underpaid grad students to do the actual teaching while he posted photos of himself in a blazer holding a clipboard, charged twice my rate, ran paid ads to bury my marketing, and stole half my students before he got bored and shut it all down. After college, I spent 2 years quietly building an e-commerce brand selling specialty home goods. I made $80,000 in my second year working from my apartment. I made the mistake of mentioning it at Thanksgiving when my aunt asked what I was up to. Trevor wasn't even at the table. He was down the hall. He must have been listening because by January, he'd announced a lifestyle brand with 3 investors, a warehouse he didn't need, and a logo that looked exactly like mine. My uncle pulled me aside at Christmas. "You really need to support Trevor on this. You should be helping family build, not competing with him." Competing with him. I had been doing my thing for years before he even knew what e-commerce meant. The thing that finally broke me happened last spring. I had spent 3 years quietly developing a software tool for restaurant inventory management. I had 2 paying customers and a third one in trials. I was on the verge of leaving my day job. I told my wife Hannah we could finally start trying for a baby once the 3rd customer signed. We were that close to the life we'd been planning. I made one mistake. I asked my dad for advice about a contract clause one weekend. My dad mentioned it to my uncle. My uncle told Trevor. Within 6 weeks, Trevor had raised $500,000 from his country club connections, hired a developer to build a worse version of my tool, and undercut me on pricing with 2 of my 3 customers. He took my 3rd customer too, the one I'd been courting for 8 months, by promising features that didn't exist. Hannah watched me sit at our dining table for 2 days, saying nothing. She finally put her hand on mine. "He gets to ruin everything because nobody ever tells him no. You have to do something. I can't watch this happen one more time." That's when I decided to give Trevor exactly what he wanted, a bigger idea than he could handle. I picked the trap carefully. I had a friend in the food delivery space who'd shown me her real numbers from a failed ghost operation the year before. Ghost operations sound like a goldmine on paper. Premium food, delivery only, no dining room, no waiters, scale fast. The reality is that delivery apps take 30% of every order, food costs eat another 30, packaging eats more, and marketing spend eats whatever's left. You need volume you'll never actually get. My friend had lost $200,000 before she pulled the plug. I started talking about ghost operations at every family event for 2 months straight. I told my dad I was obsessed with the concept. I told my aunt I was touring commercial cooking space leases. I had Hannah pretend to be annoyed at me for spending every weekend on a secret project. I made sure word would get to Trevor through the family grapevine, which it always did. Then I pulled back. I told everyone at a Sunday dinner that I'd run the numbers and the upfront cost was just too much for me. I wish I could swing it. The market is wide open right now. Somebody's going to print money on this in the next 12 months. Trevor looked like he was about to vibrate out of his chair. 2 weeks later, he had signed a 3-year lease on a commercial cooking space on the wrong side of town, bought commercial equipment on a small business loan, hired 2 cooks at salaries he could not afford, and launched 3 virtual brands on every delivery app at the same time, which meant he was paying 3 times the marketing budget to fight for the same eyeballs. He cornered me at my parents' house in May with that smug grin he always got. "Remember that idea you couldn't afford? I just hit my first 100 orders in a week. You really should have moved faster. Thinking is for people who can't do." I told him congratulations and patiently waited for chaos to ensue. The reviews were fine at first, 4 and 5 stars. Things like good food, fast delivery, and will order again. I felt a pinch of doubt during those first couple of weeks, like maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe Trevor was actually going to pull this off, but I knew the math. I knew what was coming. Right around the 5-week mark, the wheels started falling off. The 1-star reviews came in slow at first, then stacked. Ordered from 2 different places and got the same container with the same sticker half peeled off. Food was ice cold when it arrived. Wrong order, got someone else's food. No response from the restaurant. It was exactly what you'd expect when one guy tries to run 3 separate restaurant brands out of one tiny prep space with 2 cooks. The tickets were piling up faster than they could plate them. Orders were getting mixed up because 3 different menus were firing at the same time on 3 different tablets. The delivery drivers were waiting too long for pickups, which meant the food that did go out was sitting in bags getting cold. About a week after the bad reviews started, I got a call from Khadijah, my friend who had lost $200,000 on her own ghost operation the year before. She was the one whose real numbers I'd studied when I was picking the trap. She said she'd been scrolling through one of the delivery apps and spotted 3 new brands all launched around the same time, all coming out of the same zip code with menus that looked like someone watched the same YouTube video about ghost operations she'd watched 4 years ago. I played dumb for about 2 seconds, but Khadijah was too smart for that. She said, "Is this your cousin, the one you told me about?" I told her yeah, it was Trevor. She got quiet for a second, then said, "He's running 3 menus out of 1 prep space?" That's what I did. He's got maybe 4 months before he's underwater. I asked her to keep it to herself. I told her it was a family thing, and I didn't want it getting complicated. She said she understood, but then she added, 4 months is generous. If his cooks quit, it's 2. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone for a while after that. 4 months, maybe 2. The fuse was already lit. All I had to do was nothing, which for once in my life was exactly the plan. June rolled around and my parents hosted a family dinner at their place. Trevor showed up late, made sure everyone noticed when he walked in, and spent the whole dinner talking about scaling. We're scaling the operation. Once we scale past a certain order volume, the margins get really healthy. I'm looking at a second location for Q4. He sounded like a guy reading off a pitch deck he didn't understand. I sat there and ate my food and said nothing. Hannah was next to me doing the same. Then my dad Lou pulled me aside near the bathroom with that look he gets when he's about to give me advice I didn't ask for. He said, "Trevor's doing really well well with that food thing. Maybe you two could work together. I felt that old familiar sting, the one I'd been feeling since I was 16 years old. My own father standing in front of me suggesting I go work for the guy who stole it, giving Trevor credit for something I had planted. I just nodded and went back to the table. Hannah found my hand under the table and squeezed it without a word. That squeeze said, hold on, and I know at the same time. On the drive home, something cracked open in me, and I told her I felt like calling Trevor right now and telling him I built the cage he was sitting in. She looked at me hard. If you do that, he goes to your uncle. Your uncle calls your dad, and suddenly, you're the villain. You wait. She was right. I put my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep. 2 weeks later, I was at my parents' house picking up a dish my mom had left for us, and my aunt Marissa was there sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee. She mentioned Trevor had some staffing trouble. Just casual, just filling air. Inside, I was doing the math. One cook down meant Trevor was running 3 brands with 1 person in the prep space, or he was back there himself, which meant nobody was managing orders, nobody was handling the delivery app tablets, and nobody was dealing with customer complaints. 1 cook was already gone, and it hadn't even been 3 months since launch. I drove home that afternoon feeling something I can only describe as calm. Not happy, not excited, just calm, like I had finally stopped running on a treadmill that Trevor had been controlling the speed of for 15 years. For once, I wasn't scrambling to rebuild something he broke. I was just sitting still, watching the thing I built do exactly what it was supposed to do. By August, the delivery apps had done what delivery apps do to places with bad ratings. They buried him. Trevor's brands used to show up on the first or second page when you searched for food in that part of town. Now you had to scroll past 30 or 40 other places before you'd even find one of them. The only way to fight that was ads, paid placement. Trevor was spending triple what he'd been spending just to get a fraction of the orders he'd been pulling in, and the reviews were still bad. Still 1 and 2 stars. Still cold food and wrong orders and long wait times. And then the second shoe dropped. His remaining cook figured out he was doing the work of 2 people for the pay of 1 and told Trevor he needed a raise or he was walking. Trevor couldn't afford the raise. The math wasn't there. It hadn't been there since week 6. But if that cook left, he had no prep operation at all. 3 brands on 3 apps with 0 people to make the food. So he maxed out a credit card to cover the raise. That's when the phone call started. Trevor worked his way through the family like a man going down a list. His dad Dex wrote him a check for $15,000. No questions, no business plan review, no let me see your books. Just a father handing his son money because his son asked for it. I'm not going to pretend that didn't sting a little, because my dad had never once written me a check like that for any of my businesses. Not the lawn care, not the tutoring, not the e-commerce brand, not the software tool, nothing. After Dex, Trevor called my dad Lou and asked for $10,000. My dad called me that evening, and I could hear the conflict in his voice before he even got to the point. He said he was thinking about helping because it was family. I stood in my hallway holding the phone and picked my words very carefully. That's your money, Dad, but I wouldn't. There was a long pause. He changed the subject, which meant he'd already made up his mind. He sent Trevor $5,000. $5,000 of my father's retirement money going into a hole that had no bottom. Labor Day came and my parents threw a cookout like they did every year. Trevor showed up and he looked different. Not in a dramatic way, not like he'd lost weight or stopped showering, but the energy was different. The smugness was gone. That permanent confidence he always carried around like a name tag wasn't there. He was sweating, and not just because it was hot outside. He had this look on his face like a man running numbers in his head every second and not liking any of the answers. He steered me toward the fence away from everyone and said, I need you to come in on this with me. You know food tech, you know software. We could build an ordering system together and cut out the delivery apps. 50-50 partners. I almost laughed. A laugh that started somewhere deep in my chest that I had to physically stop from reaching my mouth. Trevor was standing in front of me, sweating through his shirt at a family barbecue, offering me a 50-50 partnership in a business I had designed to fail. He was handing me a ticket to board a ship I'd built with a hole in the hull. I kept my face as neutral as I could and said, I'm not in a position to take that on right now. I've got my own stuff going on. His jaw tightened. Then he said it, the same line the whole family had been feeding me in different ways for 15 years. You always do this. You always have an excuse to not help family. I didn't respond. I just looked at him for a second, then walked back toward the grill. I could feel him staring at the back of my head, but I didn't turn around. That night, Hannah said, he's trying to make you the lifeboat. If you get in that boat, you drown with him. And then he tells everyone it was your fault it sank. She was right. She was always right about Trevor. But when he was pitching me by that fence, I'd seen something in his face I had never seen before. He was scared. Not performing scared. Actually scared. The kind where you can see it behind someone's eyes, like they've been staring at a spreadsheet at 3 in the morning, and the numbers just keep getting worse. I didn't like seeing that. I thought I would. The following week, Marissa mentioned at my parents' place that Trevor had taken out another loan against the cooking equipment to bridge a gap until things picked up in the fall. I did the math in my car in the driveway before I drove home. Trevor was on the hook for the 3-year lease on the space, the original equipment loan, the second loan against that same equipment, a maxed out credit card, and the family money. The walls weren't just closing in, they were already touching. A few days later, my dad Liu called with that careful quality in his voice. Dex had called him sounding worried. Trevor wasn't returning calls, he wasn't sleeping. His girlfriend left. I said that's rough and got off the phone as fast as I could. I sat at the dining table after that call and felt the full weight of what I'd done settle on me for the first time. It wasn't guilt, exactly. I want to be clear about that. I don't think what I did was wrong. Trevor had been stealing from me for 15 years. He destroyed my software company 6 months before I set this up. He took the thing I was building for my family, the thing that was going to let Hannah and me start trying for a baby, and ripped it out of my hands because he could. I don't feel guilty about giving him a taste of what that's like, but there's this thing about revenge that nobody tells you. Even when it's justified, even when the other person earned every single bit of what's happening to them, the act of doing it still leaves a mark on you. You carry it. It's like holding something sharp. Even when you're pointing it at the right person, your hand is still the one that's bleeding. Trevor's girlfriend left him. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't returning his own father's calls. I had done that. Not all of it. Trevor's choices were Trevor's choices. He didn't have to sign a 3-year lease. He didn't have to take out loans. He didn't have to max out credit cards. Those were all decisions he made with his own hands. But I had put the bait on the hook. I dangled it in front of him knowing exactly what he'd do. And he did it. October came and Trevor stopped showing up to family stuff. Marissa Marissa started explaining for him at the dining table one Sunday. He was just busy with the business. She said it in the voice people use when they're repeating something they've been told to say, where the words sound right but the face doesn't match. I spent a few days going back and forth in my head. Some mornings I'd think I should just call him. Other mornings I'd think about the software company. About those 2 days I sat at the dining table saying nothing, and I'd put my phone back down. I never got the chance to decide. On a Tuesday night in the middle of October, there was a knock on our apartment door. No call first, no text, just a knock. It was about 8:30 and Hannah and I were cleaning up after dinner. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole and saw Trevor standing in the hallway. I opened the door and it took me a second to process what I was looking at. He was wearing a wrinkled button-down that looked like he'd slept in it, maybe more than once. His face was thinner. His eyes had dark circles under them that made him look like a different person. He looked 10 years older than he had in May when he was showing off his watch and talking about scaling. He didn't say hello, he didn't say hey, or can I come in, or sorry for stopping by. He just stood there in my doorway and said, "Did you know this would happen?" I froze. I just stood there with my hand on the door and my mouth half open and nothing coming out. Hannah was behind me in the hallway. I could feel her there without turning around. Trevor didn't wait for an answer. He stepped past me into the apartment without being invited, walked straight to the couch, sat down, and put his head in his hands. Nobody said anything. The apartment was dead quiet except for the sound of the faucet dripping in the back. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, it felt like an hour. Then Trevor lifted his head and looked at me with red eyes. I went back through everything. You talked about ghost operations for 2 months. You got everybody excited. Then you said it was too expensive. And I jumped on it like I always jump on your stuff. But this time, the numbers never worked. They were never going to work. You knew that. I walked over and sat down in the chair across from him. Yeah, I knew. Trevor's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It didn't twist into anger. It didn't harden into that cocky mask he always wore. It crumbled. Like a wall that had been leaning for years finally just gave out. He said, "How long? How long have you been planning this?" I told him the truth. "Since you stole my software customers. Since you took the thing I was building for my family and handed it to your country club friends. I spent 3 years on that tool, Trevor. 3 years. And you took it in 6 weeks because you could." He opened his mouth. I could see the argument forming behind his eyes, the spin starting to build, the excuse getting ready to launch. Then he closed his mouth. He had nothing. For once in his entire life, Trevor Wallace had no spin, no pitch, no angle. Hannah stepped into the living room and stood near the wall with her arms crossed. Trevor looked at her, then back at me. His voice was flat when he spoke. "I'm $170,000 in debt. The lease has 2 years left. The equipment loan is in my name. My dad already gave me everything he's going to give me. I'm done." I let that sit in the air between us. I didn't apologize. I didn't gloat. I said, "Every single time you took something from me, I had to start over. Nobody in this family ever asked how that felt. Dad gave you money last month. Uncle Dex told me I should support you instead of competing with you. Competing, like I was the problem. Do you understand what that's like?" Trevor stared at the floor. He stared at it for a long time. And then he said the thing I never in my life expected to hear come out of his mouth. "I never thought about it. I actually never once thought about what it did to you. I just saw something that looked like it could work and I grabbed it every time." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't close to enough, but it was the first honest thing Trevor had ever said to me. No performance, no angle. Just a guy sitting on my couch telling me the truth about who he was. I stood up. "I'm not going to help you with the ghost operation. It's done. Walk away from it now before you owe $300,000 instead of $170. Break the lease. Sell the equipment for whatever you can get and stop borrowing money to keep something alive that was dead before you started it." Trevor nodded slowly. Then he looked up at me and asked, "Are you going to tell the family what you did?" I looked right back at him. "No. Are you going to tell them what you've been doing to me for 15 years? Trevor didn't answer. He stood up, walked to the door, and left without another word. Trevor shut down the ghost operation in November. He sold the equipment at a loss and negotiated an early lease termination that still cost him $40,000. When the dust settled, he owed roughly $130,000. Dex paid off some of it. The rest was Trevor's problem. Thanksgiving came a few weeks later, and the family acted like nothing had happened. Nobody mentioned the ghost operation. Nobody mentioned my software company that Trevor destroyed. Nobody mentioned any of it. But Trevor was quiet for the first time I could remember. He didn't pitch anything. He didn't brag. He sat at the far end of the table, ate, and left early without making a production of it. I watched him go and felt nothing dramatic, just the absence of something that had been pressing on me for a long time. I went back to building. I picked up a new client for my inventory software in December, then a second one in February. I didn't tell anyone in the family about either. Hannah asked me one night if I felt better now that it was over. I thought about it for a long time before I answered her. I don't feel better. I feel done. I feel like I'm finally building something and nobody's standing behind me copying it down. That was enough. It had to be.